One of the most unique and fascinating aspects of African American culture in Louisiana are the jazz funerals of New Orleans. Woven with the threads of tradition, religion, spirituals, and instruments, this colorful and enthusiastic ritual of mourning and sorrow introduces life into death. In order to understand and comprehend the significance and importance of jazz funeral, one must look at the tradition in four forms: its ceremony procedures, the origins, its impact on New Orleans culture, and the evolution of jazz funerals over the course of its existence. Rituals and traditions often tend to fade away within cultures and communities, but the jazz funeral has continued to thrive in neighborhoods and streets of New Orleans where the music never ceases. The traditional jazz funeral is a public burial service. The deceased is often a prominent member of society and a musician in which he or she is buried with music. The funeral is made up of two groups of people, the first and second line. The first line consists of the band, the grand marshal, and the family and friends of the deceased. And the second line consists of the uninvited guests who join in from the neighborhoods and communities in which the funeral is marched through. There are two major parts to funeral procedures: the low and somber walk to the cemetery with the first line, and the high-spirited, energetic return. The walk to the cemetery is headed by the Grand Marshal and the brass band, with the family and friends and hearse following closely. The music that is performed on the journey to the gravesite would be dirges, which are old, mostly Christian hymns or spirituals that are played in a slow tempo, such as Nearer My God to Thee or Just a Closer Walk with Thee, with hardly any improvisation from the band. The roots of jazz funerals have been linked back to Africa, where 4 centuries ago in West Africa, the tribes would hold similar processions of mourning and celebrating of the departed with music. Jazz funerals could have also been influenced by French and Spanish martial music traditions and uniquely African American cultural influences. When slavery began to flourish in the United States and members of freed people of color increased, the need for social aid and benevolent societies grew. The purpose of these clubs were to collect dues to pay for necessary healthcare costs for its members, since insurance was nearly impossible to obtain for African Americans during that time. A proper burial would also be included within this insurance. A proper burial would always include music, mostly performed by brass bands. The brass bands flourished in the 1880s to the 1920s and nearly became extinct after the Great Depression. But fortunately, the tradition of jazz funerals have lived on in the streets of New Orleans and continues to today. After the burial ceremony, the band leads the procession from the gravesite. Once the brass band is outside and in respectable distance of the cemetery, they would begin to play the second line. The second line joins in and the intensity and energy grows. The band would either play traditional jazz funeral up-tempo music or music that would express the culture of today. Some of the popular songs that would be performed would be When the Saints Go Marching In, or the popular song Didn't He Ramble, which is about a man who had a free-spirited man who had reaped what he had sown and had a good time doing it. The second line dances behind, alongside, and between the band and the family and friends of the deceased. It is also not far from reality to see a beer or other alcoholic beverages present, usually concealed in brown paper bags. Crowds from the neighborhoods and streets would join at the sound of the funky music. The second line is really the gumbo of the ceremony and truly reflects New Orleans culture as a whole. The second line consists of a variety of people from white to black, young to old, natives to tourists, family to strangers, and from well-dressed people to women still in their morning gowns and rollers, all mixed together for one purpose, the celebration of life. To fully grasp the significance of jazz funerals to New Orleans culture and community, I was able to spend some time interviewing and conversing with a young man who has tremendously been affected and moved by the power of jazz funerals. In an interview with Daniel Smallwood, a longtime African-American resident of New Orleans' 8th Ward, he was able to share his past experience and future aspirations for the tradition. At 7 years old, Daniel experienced his first jazz funeral, and when I interviewed him and asked him what he thought of when he first experienced that first jazz funeral, this is what he responded.
My first impression was, I guess at that age, like both the shock and excitement, because I was a young kid, and I'm like, oh, this person died. Why are they, celebrating? I was kind of, confused and baffled about what was happening, but I was joining in the dance. I didn't know if what I was doing was the right thing or the wrong thing, but I ended up, doing the right thing, because that's what the second line is all about, celebration.
Oftentimes in societies and cultures, rituals and traditions that were once prevalent begins to fade away and diminish into a memory, written down in history books to only be read of and never experienced by future generations. However, in New Orleans, within the African American community, a long-standing tradition of jazz funerals, which has experienced its ups and downs, has continued to thrive. In the interview with Daniel Smallwood, when asked if he sees the tradition continuing with the future generations, he confidently responded,
after Hurricane Katrina, when a lot of the, natives left, a lot of that tradition left with them. But trust me, New Orleans is a city that always bounces back. So the second line will remain there forever.
In the documentary, New Orleans Jazz Funerals, From the Inside, one interviewee said, "You cry at the birth and rejoice at the death. You cry at the birth because the baby is entering a time of trials and tribulations, and rejoice at the death because they are leaving and going to a place of glory forever, where tears and sorrow are no more."